Another time I had what I thought was a good idea. I was going to put the same card on every airport ceiling. And then any magician that flies can force that card, and make it disappear and say, okay, it's already at the airport. On about the 7th ceiling, it was in Wichita. Roger Klaus is taking me to the airport. Even though we were in a rush, look, I got to do that. I don't know when I'm going to be back here, so I need to put a card on this ceiling. And Roger said, well, don't do it here. There was a little group of 4 security guards. Roger, these guys love this trick, And so I go ahead and I put the card on the ceiling, but these guys talk to each other, and one of them walks over and says, well, hey, what is that? Well, that's the 4 spades, How long does that stay up there? Oh, well, it never comes down, which is what I say to Lehman. Well, it never comes down. He goes, it never comes down? Never comes down. He goes, wait right here. And he goes and he makes a phone call, and he comes back and he says, okay, you're under arrest for defacing public property.
Welcome to another episode of Desert Island Tricks. We're in one of the rare situations where we're actually in the studio recording today. So normally we do these over the internet, but today the actual guest is in the studio. So I'm very excited. Now, of course, you're going to have seen the name at this point. You're going to know who this person is, but I have to give you the introduction anyway. So today's guest has had a profound impact on the world of magic. In 1982, he won the gold medal in close-up magic at the FISM World Championships. Throughout his career, he's made numerous television appearances, including performances on The Tonight Show and Late Night with David Letterman. He's also graced the stages worldwide, from the Magic Castle in Hollywood to Universal Studios. His Easy to Master series has impacted countless magicians, and his seminal book, The Magic of Michael Ammar, is considered an essential read in magic literature. And I'm guessing lots of people have had that signed over the past couple of weeks. His accolades include multiple awards from the Academy of Magical Arts, such as Close-Up Magician of the Year, Lecturer of the Year, and Parlor Magician of the Year. In 1999, Magic Magazine recognized him as one of the most influential magicians of the 20th century. He is currently, at the time of recording, right now, on a UK lecture tour, which I had the opportunity to see the other day, and hopefully this will be going out on the Monday. So if you haven't had a chance to see him, make sure you go and see him over the end of the tour. Of course, it is the wonderful Michael Ammar. How are you, Michael?
I'm fine, Jamie. Nice to be with you.
I'm very excited to be with you.
Thank you.
We've already had some stories. We were just talking a second ago about some of the incredible things that you've had to do. So how have you found the tour so far over here?
Well, it's been really heartwarming to see the reaction that people are having to the lecture. This is day 21, and this is the 21st event in 21 days. So it was rather, it's a rather dense tour. Hannah is with me and doing all the driving, and it would really be difficult to do a tour like this without someone, really there with me. And, and that really just makes it possible for me to, during the break, to pay attention to people, to take photos and sign things, and instead of having to say, well, look, I got to, be back at the table and, trying to sell something, and it just makes it better, I think, for everybody, that I have all that time to spend just with the people attending, And, I love it with the photos, because sometimes these guys show me those photos 30 years later, on this particular tour. One guy said, you were here 31 years ago, and I'll tell you how I know that. Here's that photo. And you see that young man that I'm with? This is him right here. And he's got a young son of his own now, and he's all grown up. And it's just really, it's just interesting to see the years go by. And the photos are, a good reminder of it. Because, a lot of times I don't have a chance to take the photos. So it's nice to see them.
Yeah, we were talking about your book earlier and just how many things you've had to sign. So I wonder how many signatures you've put across over the past few weeks.
Well, it's all, if somebody's going to carry that big book to the lecture, I'm going to sign it. It's like a 2 kilo thing to lug around. So, yeah, it's always a pleasure. I leaf through it, just to make sure it's been read. And every now and then it's really cool because guys have all these little Post-it notes, marking different pages, and it's nice. But every now and then one looks kind of pristine. And I said, you really ought to read some of this stuff, But that's just a good way to know if somebody's really spent time with the book. Or not over the years.
Well, I think lots of people are going to be playing Michael Ammar bingo with this and trying to work out what's going to be in your ultimate list. I'm guessing a lot of people will be listening to this when they're walking or driving, and when they think of you, Peter said it earlier on, because Peter knows what your list is, and he said if there was a list of tricks, these are the ones that I think you would have put in. So I wonder if everyone listening now will have those tricks in there. I wonder if they're going to hit the mark.
If they can guess what the signature effects are. After you've lived with these things for a number of decades, people do kind of associate one trick or another with you. So it's very possible that they've guessed what my list would be.
Yeah, well, I think we should get into it. So, if this is your first time listening, the idea is that we're about to maroon Michael on his very own desert island. When he's there, he's allowed to take 8 tricks, banish 1 thing, take 1 book and 1 non-magic item. Particulars, who's there, how many animals are there, how big the island is, all of that, we do not mind. It's in Michael's own imagination. So with that being said, let's find out what you put in your first position.
Oh, interesting. Well, I would take the cups and balls. That really is an effect that you can do a lot of different things with. Over the years, I've learned many different routines, and it's one of the effects that, when I was spending time with the professor, one of the things that he really wanted to see was not just somebody wanting to learn his routine. For 50 years, all people wanted to do is just, I just hope to be able to do your routine. And advice that I'd heard him give many magicians was study the classics, and figure out what makes them work. And then figure out what you would want to do with those things, which in those days, the classics were the Ivern cups and balls routine, the Ivern linking rings routine, that sort of thing. And I didn't want to make it seem like I just wanted to learn his routine, because I didn't need to, have him help me learn his routine. It had been in print for, 40 years, but I did at one point, it's not like he took students and things like that at his age, If you were friends and you lived in that area, you'd come to the castle every night and he'd be there, and you'd spend a lot of time just talking about magic. But at one point I did say, I'd like to perform your routine for you simply so that I can discuss what I learned from learning your routine. And, if you're familiar with his routine, he starts by handing out the balls and handing out the cups and that sort of thing. And after performing, I said, well, for myself, I think maybe I can produce those 3 balls. So I can be 3 effects into it before I even start bringing the cups into it. And there's a sequence where the cups stack and things happen, but that sort of thing didn't fool me even before I knew the effect. So I said, I don't think I'll do any stacking things, and maybe I can load the cups along the way so that it's not always happening right there at the end, and that sort of thing. And so that's the reason my cups and balls routine is completely different than his, is simply because, I just wanted to show him that I learned something from learning his routine, and that I applied myself to, figuring out what I wanted to do with that same thing. So, I had learned Pop Krieger's routine, I learned the Di Vernon routine, and I had my own routine. And in the lecture, there's, a routine where the spectator performs the cups and balls and is fooled as he's doing it. So it's just the kind of thing that if you had a lot of time alone, you could play with it in a lot of different ways. And, and David Williamson has a 2-cup routine, and so there's just lots of possibilities with the cups. And so that would be, one of the things that I knew that I'd know I could do a lot of stuff with.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned it. So one thing that I noticed about your cups and balls from watching the lecture the other day was normally with the cups and balls, it's the magician doing the magic, and if there is a challenge from the spectator or the spectator taking part, they're normally guessing which cup it's under. Mm-hmm. What I really liked about the one that you lectured the other day in particular, the spectator was doing everything. So even from the beginning stage where you get them to mix them up and then they lift up that middle cup, it was such a nice approach to see all of the focus on the spectator.
Yeah, the cups is very much of a watch me effect. And it was just an interesting challenge to say, well, what if you had nothing to do with it? But genuinely the spectator is performing, and he's not looking silly. He's actually looking like the magician, There's certain effects that the professor made the point that some things like that, well, which cup is it in, that sort of thing, the spectator's always going to be wrong. And how are you going to do that and still be a nice guy? Things like the 3-card Monte, says you have to really be careful with something like that, because in that effect, they are always wrong. And how are you going to do that and still be a nice guy is part of the challenge, and he had kind of approaches that, accomplished that. And, to where it's like, well, you saw me move it here, right? No, it's over here. Hell no, I'm just explaining how it's done. And so they're wrong, but hey, you're a nice guy, and the way you go about it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great opening gambit. But let's move on to number 2. So what did you put in your second spot?
Well, I think I would do card on ceiling, if there was a ceiling on a desert island, I don't know if it'd be card on, palm leaf, or but, that's a very memorable effect. That's one of the rare effects that actually gets better as time goes by. Most effects peak the moment they see it, and then it kind of tapers off unless you've made it very memorable in some way. Like it's a good idea to, if you can somehow alter something magically and give it to them in this permanently altered state, now they have a way of, retaining the memory of that. And, the card on ceiling is one of those rare effects that can last 20 years sometimes. One of my good memories is, Steve Wozniak, the guy that actually invented the Apple computer, is an amateur magician that loves magic. And so back in the 90s, I was at his home, two or three times maybe, to perform for him and his guests. And on the first occasion, I asked him, I said, I do this trick where a card appears on the ceiling. Would it be okay? I mean, you have such a beautiful home. Would it be okay if I put a card on your ceiling? And, I insist. And so I put the card on his ceiling. And it was maybe 4 years before I came back. And as I'm walking in, I'm saying, it would be so cool if he still got this card on the ceiling. And I went in, and he had taken a picture frame and put it around the card on the ceiling. And that's great. He goes, it's the best conversation piece in my house, is that card on the ceiling. So, there are times when, it actually gets better as time goes by. I mean, people actually, people are very poor recording devices. Memory is a very malleable thing. And that becomes part of the fun of performing is trying to help sculpt that memory, so that when they reflect back on it, there's really no possible way to really get to how it really happened in certain presentations. And the card on ceiling is one of those things where it's just. By the time a couple of years goes by, it's like I was just thinking of a card, and the next thing you know, I looked up and the card's on the ceiling, and somehow it's got my name on it, and so it's really kind of custom made for people to kind of participate with their imagination, And I feel that way a lot of times with magic, and sometimes let an audience know, look, we're going to be collaborators this evening in an effort to create, a special, memorable experience. So we'll be working together to create that memorable experience, and there was an interesting book called Understanding Comics. It was written by Scott McCloud. And he makes the point that in a comic book, the interesting part in the comic book isn't in the individual panels. It's in between those panels, what they call the gutter, between those panels. And he says that's the place where the reader is a co-creator of that story. And a good author and a good illustrator know the certain kind of transition between panels to where the reader is a collaborator in the creation of that story. And that's why people who read the comic first always like the comic book better than the movie. It's because the movie tries to show you everything. Whereas the comic, is a collaboration between the author and the artist and the reader, and that's why I try to kind of leave certain places, certain invitations for them to think for just a couple of seconds. Okay, now what's really going to come out of that cup? Or what really happens when he kind of taps it with the wand, or casts a shadow over it, or something like that. What does that mean, And whatever they're imagining is always going to be better than what's really happening. So it's nice to give them the opportunity to be a collaborator in the experience.
Yeah, and just before we started talking, you mentioned that you've done this in some pretty incredible places.
But I've also done it at the Louvre, at the Kremlin, at a little corner of the Vatican, not on a piece of art, but in a kind of a courtyard, very high ceiling. Although, when you're in the Sistine Chapel, it's easy to think, man, if I could just get it in the right hand of God, that would be so cool, and have God palming the ace of spades or something. But there are times and places. The Louvre was interesting because it was such a high ceiling. There were several magicians there at the time, and they started taking pictures of the card on the ceiling because it was, just an interesting high ceiling. And as they were taking those pictures, a group of Japanese tourists happened to come in as they were, and So they noticed they're taking pictures of this thing on the ceiling. And so they started taking pictures of this card on the ceiling, which we thought was hilarious, and because otherwise they never would have noticed it, But we go on and tour the Louvre, and we come back out about 3 hours later, and there was just enough overlap of tourists to where when we came out 3 hours later, there's still people aware of it, and we're taking pictures of it, and it stayed there for several years, from what I understand, clearly past the time when they knew that it was there, but clearly decided to leave it. And, another time, I had what I thought was a good idea. I was going to put the same card on every airport ceiling that I was in, and even to the point where I would maybe run an ad in Genie and tell magicians, okay, the four of spades is on these airport ceilings. If you live near an airport, please go to that airport and put a four of spades on it, and we'll keep a list of airports that have that card. And then any magician that flies can force that card, and make it disappear and say, okay, it's already at the airport. And, is that going to be your final destination? No, you're going on to Chicago? Okay, I'll send it to Chicago too. It'll be in this baggage claim. But on about the seventh ceiling, it was in Wichita. I just filmed something for Joe Stevens, and Roger Klaus has taken me to the airport. And then, even though we were in a rush, look, I got to do that. I don't know when I'm going to be back here, so I need to put a card on this ceiling. And that's the way I looked at it. I need to put a card on this ceiling. And Roger said, well, don't do it here. There was a little group of 4 security guards over in the corner talking. And I was so naive in those days, Roger, these guys love this trick, And so I go ahead and I put the card on the ceiling, but these guys talk to each other, and one of them walks over and says, well, hey, what is that? Well, that's the 4 spades, How long does that stay up there? Oh, well, it never comes down, which is what I say to Laban. Well, it never comes down. He goes, it never comes down? Never comes down. He goes, wait right here. And he goes and he makes a phone call, and he comes back and he says, okay, you're under arrest for defacing public property. And I just couldn't believe it. It's just like, wait, no, you don't understand. People actually pay me to do this, but he starts reading me my rights, Okay, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to... And Roger Klaus interrupts and he says, wait a minute. What if we take the card down? And the guy goes, hey, if you take the card down, it's no problem. And he goes, okay, he's got to catch a plane, but if you let him go, I promise we'll take the card down. And for 20 years, 30 years, Roger, really made me believe that this was, a huge obligation. That they had to build a scaffolding to get to the ceiling. And in 3 hours, we're gathering materials to take this down. But eventually, I ran into a guy who was there, and he runs in, oh, hey, you know what? I was with Roger and you at the Wichita airport when you almost got arrested. Oh, you're kidding. Oh, my gosh. I'm so sorry, for all the trouble it caused. And he goes, well, what do you mean? Well, Roger told me it took 3 hours to get that card down. No, these guys had a long pole to change the light bulbs with, and they just got the pole and knocked it down. It took 2 minutes, and there's that Roger, every time I saw him, you got to buy me lunch, But as it turns out, it was, it was a lesson to me. That's when I started to say, you can't just assume people want that card on their ceiling. And that's when I started to ask people, do you mind if I put a card on your ceiling,
So whilst Alakazam does not condone placing the four of spades on top of high structures, if you do happen to do that, someone please start a little forum so that we know where all of those four of spades are, because we could carry on your legacy then and see how many arrests we can have in our industry. But that leads us to number 3. So what did you put in your third spot?
Well, I love doing the coins through silk. It's I've done it enough to where I do it without even thinking. And it's really smoothed out to flow from, one coin to the next in a really simple way. And it's kind of deceptive in a lecture because it looks so simple, but it's a good thing to cover in workshops and things like that, because you really have to kind of learn how the scarf moves and to work with the scarf and have your justification for handling it in a certain way, and it progresses in an interesting 3-phase way. The first coin comes out the middle, the second coin they pick which coin, and the third coin the spectator's holding it in their hand. So it just has a nice theatrical progression to it, and I've learned to use body language that kind of plays it up really big. I can do it for 100, 150 people, just with the right body language, which I think is sleight of hand really is more about body language than anything else. It's not. You're not saying, okay, there's a coin in this hand, but now the coin is in this hand, and it's not in this hand. And it's all body language that's indicating, just from a shift of energy and focus, and I'm just surprised that more people don't really emphasize just how important body language is in the performance of any sleight of hand and any performance in general. In fact, as you start to say, well, I want to learn more about nonverbal communication and body language, you realize that people trust body language more than they trust your words. They interpret body language without even realizing that's what they're doing. I'm reading their body language, and they know you can script your words that you're speaking, but they never suspect that you would script what your body is saying. And if you're familiar with Anthony Robbins, the motivational speaker, he's developed several programs over the years, but his original program back in the 80s was based on physiology and affecting how you feel by the way you move. So if you script the right body language, you actually affect your own feelings of confidence and poise and openness and fairness, and people make conclusions about those things before you even have a chance to say something. As soon as you're in sight, they're making conclusions, about, if you're happy to be there, if you're, all sorts of things. So to be aware of that on a larger sense is a valuable thing for any performer, is to be aware of what your body is saying, and to script that as carefully as you would script your words, as a performer, and that kind of comes through in the performance of the coins through silk, because there's just ways to really play that big, and with very open arms and open palms and that sort of things, Whereas, I have friends that only do it in restaurants, with just little body turns, for two people at a table. And it's just different. It's just interesting how different that effect can play just based on the body language that you use in any given performance arena,
Yeah, I think that this is one of the tricks that, obviously, if anyone is playing Ammar Bingo, I think it would be on everyone else's list. But what was the genesis of this? So where did this come from for you?
Oh, yeah, there's an effect called expansion of texture that's done with a handkerchief, where they're holding a coin that's in the handkerchief, and they're holding the other end of the handkerchief without realizing there's a coin hidden inside there. And you make that coin disappear as you slap the handkerchief, and that other coin kind of drops in and clicks against the other coin. And at the time, I was just thinking, I wonder if you could do that with a scarf that you could see through. And so I was playing with it, and pretty soon realized, you could even make it look like a coin's in there when it's not, and that's when I realized, well, you know what, maybe there's a way to use that property on a really sheer scarf to create an interesting sequence of penetrations. And originally it was going to be a 4-coin thing, but getting that progression for 4 in a really nice theatrical way, it just made sense. No, 3 is a good theatrical number. And I think Chris Powers does a version where he uses a 4th coin, and is able to make it look really amazing in the way that 4th coin kind of comes into play. I just like using 3 because now I get to do that really open. I'm not hiding anything. You're aware of everything. You know where all the coins are at every point, and that sort of thing. It came about from originally working on expansion of texture, which was from Stars of Magic back in the day. Wonderful book, Stars of Magic.
Well, I think it's a real lesson in taking something that would normally be a hindrance, something that's see-through. Certainly when you see coins through, for example, table. It's the fact that you can't see through the table is aiding the method.
Yeah.
Whereas with yours, you're using the fact that you can see through it as part of the method.
As the method, yes. Yeah.
I love the moment where it untwirls.
I used to say, now you know the coin is inside the scarf, and without going into much detail, if the coins are cold, sometimes the spectator, might say, oh, no, when I would put it in their hands, they, oh, no, the coin's in my hand. And that was a lesson to me. I said, okay, I won't say it that way anymore. What I'll say is, okay, I'm going to put the coin into your hand. Hang on to it. And that way, if they feel the coin, they have no need to announce it, because I just told everybody. It may mean something different to everybody else, kind of a dual reality thing, but it's one of those things from experience. You learn to cover your tracks in ways that, make sure that there's no need for the spectator to speak up. It's interesting, the misconceptions that people make about being a professional. They'll say, well, they assume as a pro you don't make mistakes anymore. But you do make mistakes. You just learn to go with it and to resolve it in interesting ways, or how to prevent that from being a real problem. But the other thing, they say, how do you handle hecklers? As somebody who's just performing socially and casually, it's easy to have somebody want to interrupt the performance and kind of comment or say, well, hey, let me shuffle those cards, or something like that. But, the more you charge and, the more you manage your own attitude, you don't get hecklers. People want to see what happens. And again, that kind of goes back to advice from the professor. He said, never forget what Nate Leipzig said. He says, they don't mind being fooled by a magician. But no, they don't mind being fooled by a gentleman, is the thing, which tells you if you have an attitude as you perform, you can kind of invite people to, interrupt or, have a comment or something like that. But if you perform with the right attitude, a good gifting sort of attitude, in a gentlemanly way, why would they interrupt? And why would they say anything? So it's I haven't had what you would call a heckler. I don't even remember the last time, that interfered with what I was doing.
Well, I think that's a great choice in that number 3. So let's go to number 4. So what was in your 4th spot?
Well, I love doing shadow coins, which is an effect where you have 4 coins and you really just kind of cast a shadow over those coins without touching them, and coins travel from one spot to another in a really magical sort of way. And, there's just, again, there's ways of doing that to really make it seem like it's just magic. You're just really just casting a shadow over coins, and coins travel from one spot to another, and you do it in a really convincing way. You kind of eliminate all the possible questions that they might have before you begin. And again, you kind of figure out what questions they may have, and you try to answer those questions before they think to bring them up. Some people think I have 5 or 6 coins, right? I give you my word, I'm only going to use what you're looking at right now, and they think I have something sticky on my hands. You see, no, there's no sticky stuff, They think maybe I got an extension kind of that comes out of my sleeve, but you see I have no sleeves, and so now that you know what I'm not going to do, I'll show you what happens. And yeah, again, just with experience, you learn what questions are going to come to people's minds. And if you can answer those questions before they think to ask them, it's a lot smoother sailing. What
were your inspirations when you first started learning shadow coins?
Oh, you know what? That's based on a David Roth matrix. But he would do it at eye level, on a table. And so consequently, he really kind of had to brush the table with his hands as he did it, because if you're sitting at the table with him, you can see what's going on, unless you really are kind of hugging the table. But I used to do a lot of magic on the floor, and I just learned that, if I'm down here and you're up there, I can really, kind of manage your perspective in a way that lets me cheat, and in ways that make the effect seem impossible. And there was just kind of a slow discovery of realizing, if you kind of force their perspective, there's things that you can do that make things look more magical, and that was just it was just kind of being aware of what's going on, and when I'm here and they're there, other things are possible, And it's just how it came together.
Yeah, well, that's one of the ones that we get to learn tonight as well.
Yeah, I don't often get a chance to do it, but we'll have a situation tonight where we'll be able to give the right perspective, right view of it. But, did it so many times on so many floors. Eventually, I got shadow coin knees, and I had to have people help me up, and so I don't do it as often as I used to. But the illusion is really nice if you get the right perspective.
Yep, amazing. So that leads us to number 5. So what was in your 5th spot?
I like the bill switch. The Mike Kozlowski $100 bill switch, changing a 1 to 100. Just the technique, I've always thought was just a really technological marvel that in what seems to be just a simple, folding a bill 4 times and unfolding the bill, some pretty amazing things happen. More happens than you would imagine. It's built into just the way you fold and unfold the bill. And, it always amazed me to do it. And along the ways, you figure out again how to eliminate things they may be thinking. The bill never leaves your sight. Don't even blink. Do this, and you just learn ways to do it to where you don't have this real discrepancy of once you've changed a 1 to 100, why would you change 100 back to a 1? But there's ways to rationalize that, and there's ways to do it where you really sometimes don't have to change it back. It's a bit of a challenge with the plastic money. We still have paper money in the U.S., and that really makes it a much more manageable thing. All the papers, all the bills are the same color, so you can delay the realization that it's a different bill until the bill is really too large, for anything to have happened. But with different color bills, they know fairly much right away. It's just different, done differently over here. Somebody, I wish I could remember his name, but told me that he does it with kind of monopoly money to change either monopoly money back into, real money or the opposite. But in that way, that's really good, because now during the difficult part, you don't have money that's kind of trying to expand and open up. But in the U.S., I like to do the inside out dollar, borrow a bill and turn it inside out. It's such an amazing sight. And I have a good experience with it in 1999 in Richmond, Virginia, at a show for Jim Cherry was a banker that I worked with for many years, and now he's retired, and he's he's a very experienced amateur that some of these magicians may know. But at his dinners, there was always interesting people, politicians. At one event he was part of, there were three governors of Virginia at the same event. And it was like the first time these 3 governors had ever been together at the same event. But at one of those, the Secretary of the Treasury was in the audience, the guy that signs the money, the signatures on the money. And I got to turn his dollar bill inside out, which was a great memory for me. It's also the day I discovered it's a federal offense to do that. But fortunately, you can turn it back real quick. And he even commented, he says, oh, yeah, I may want to have a conversation with the Secret Service about this, you know. And the only two things the Secret Service does in the U.S. is protect the president and deal with currency crimes. Any counterfeiting money or any currency crimes is exclusively handled by the Secret Service. And he was quick to point that out. And so we had an interesting conversation about it.
We're learning that you're nearly getting arrested a lot in your career through magic. I think the next book we need is Michael Ammar's 10 Ways Not to Get Arrested with Magic.
And 10, near punishable offenses.
Great. So that leads us to number 6. So what was in your 6th spot?
Well, I've been doing the Bill to Lemon for many years, and I've experimented with every possible method for having that bill appear inside of a lemon. I've made it appear in oranges and kiwis and all sorts of different things. But a lemon, there's something kind of iconic about a lemon, and along over the years, I've developed a handling that really matches all the criteria that I aspired to in the creation of that effect. There's ways to do it so that the money looks really kind of tightly rolled, and that might lead some people to think, well, maybe you can just squish it in there real quick or something like that. But or they tear a corner off, or they have the serial number, read, both of which, certainly to tear the corner off of 100 makes no sense at all as a way of identifying a bill. But to do it with a marked bill, and I don't say write your name across there. I just say just put a mark on there that you'll definitely recognize. Some people just put a little dot or draw a mustache, on under a happy face or something like that. But that's the way you would identify any piece of currency, is just a little mark on there so that you know it. And when it appears inside the lemon, with this one method, particularly with plastic money, if you've folded it into quarters or eighths, it really opens up naturally. And to do that in the Bill to Lemon, so when you cut the lemon open and it's really opened up inside of there, it really looks impossible. It looks like it simply appeared inside the lemon, and there's no way that something opened up like that could have possibly have appeared inside that lemon. And particularly if it's a lemon that they've been holding the whole show, and that sort of thing. And over the years, I eventually, one time Paul Harris was staying with me for a number of months when I was working at Caesar's Magical Empire. I was doing 5 or 6 shows a night, 6 nights a week, for 18 months. So along the way, you really had a chance to think about different ways of approaching this. And one time, Paul said, boy, it sure would be nice if you had kind of a kicker. Everything is kind of built up to that moment in such a way that, and I would say, but, I don't want to go on, it makes such a nice complete circle that it's the first thing you do is hand out the lemon, and the last thing you do, this lemon comes out of one of the cups, and the money is inside that lemon. I don't want to do anything, out of left field, because that, circle is so satisfying. And Paul, being the kind of guy he was, he said, well, maybe you could put the lemon back together or something like that. And it's like, I've done this trick so many times, and I don't think I ever would have thought put the lemon back together at the end. And so at Caesar's Magical Empire, I got to try that idea out. And what's interesting about this Magical Empire is it's such a beautiful setting and such a beautiful stage, and you come through these beautiful curtains, to a performing area that's surrounded by these really wonderful giant golden dragons, and naturally they assume when you exit through those curtains, there must be some kind of Siegfried and Roy level, jacuzzi dressing room behind those curtains, but there's not. You have about 2 feet and there's a brick wall. So when you walk through the curtain and when you exit, you just kind of turn around and stand there while everybody walks out. And it was wonderful because you got to hear what people talked about after your performance. And they're talking about it openly, like you're not there. And it was the best feedback, because I really do want to know, well, what did you like? What did you think? How do you think certain things are possible? If I could, I'd interview every audience after the show, just, because, magic only happens in their minds. That's it. No, it's not about the techniques. It's not about the props. It only happens inside the mind of a spectator, and so the mind of the spectator, that's the final battleground. What do they think? What do they notice? What do they care about? What don't they care about? How are they going to remember this when they look back on it? And so to hear their thoughts is really the best insight that you can get to how you're doing. And what just stunned me was putting that lemon back together. In most cases, basically nullified the bill to lemon, the money coming out of that lemon, because now they're left with that lemon intact. And the majority of people would say something like, I got to tell you, it really looked like he cut that lemon open, And I couldn't believe it, because I make such a big deal of cutting it open and taking it out. And the money smells like lemon, and but by being left with that lemon intact, the only thing that they could think was, man, it sure looked like he cut it open when he did that trick, but that must have been an illusion, and that was just the one response I did not expect, that they would think that, somehow we must have imagined that part where he cut the lemon open. And so I quit doing it for, a number of years. And then it occurred to me, well, what if they put the money back in the lemon before I put it back together? Okay, still got your mark on it, right? Okay, fold it in half, fold it in half, fold it up. Now put it back inside the lemon, okay? And then you take the 2 halves and you just kind of roll them together like this, and now the lemon's back together. Mm-hmm. And you give it to them. And, and then I kind of act like the show is over, and I gather my stuff, and people start to laugh because the guy's just holding the lemon. And along the way, I've asked them, I found out their name and where they live. Oh, you live in New York? Well, welcome to Las Vegas and all this. And finally, I looked to the guy and, I'll tell you what I would do. I'd wait till I got back to New York, to cut that lemon open. And that way you can bring your friends over and you cut it open and make an even better story, Or you can cut it open now, whichever you prefer. But now you have a choice. And do you want to cut it open now? You want the magic to go with you and experience it with your friends later on? And it's just an interesting position to put him in. Mm-hmm. Do I want to, and most of the time, I cut it open now, which is really the perfect reaction, because of, that's just like saying, even though I watched everything you did and I saw the two pieces go back together with the money in there, I cannot believe that the money is in this lemon that you've just given me, And so, okay, we can cut it open now. And you let them cut it open now, and the money's back inside the lemon. But it's just a way of having them kind of acknowledge that it can't possibly be back inside this lemon, and yet, there it is. And so it's just a really, satisfying ending. Every now and then somebody says, you know what, I'll take it home. And at that point, I just ask the audience, are we okay with that? If the magic doesn't end right here, but and usually the audience really said, nah, you better cut it open. Only on a couple of occasions did the guy actually say, no, I'm taking it with me. And of course the money's in there when they go home and they cut it open. I just tell them, look, when you cut the lemon, okay, don't go straight through, right? You have to cut it like it's got a core. Cut it kind of in a circle, right? Don't go straight through. There'll be 250s in there, and that's a different trick, But if you're going to do it, just cut it carefully in a circle before you pull the halves apart, because you don't want to cut the money in half. No. And but just the nature of that effect, and how you can make it really matter to the performer, to the person doing it. The worst advice I ever heard was, if you really squeeze the lemon when you cut it open, it'll make the money so soggy that they'll give it to you as a tip, which is not what I want. I don't want that guy, you might as well keep it, So I actually do it in a way that their money is just moist, smells like a lemon, but they can put it right back in their pocket, and typically, the 99.99 times, the person that offered that money is the happiest guy in the room later. And whenever I come back to do repeat performances, I got a friend that wants to be the guy, So, when you ask for 100, be sure to use this guy's 100, because he wants to be that guy. And that's what you want. You want that guy who took a chance, who took that wallet out of their pocket and, offered to put their money on the table to see what happens. You want them to be the happiest person in the room, and because you want everybody else thinking, I should have been the guy that offered that 100. You don't want the whole audience thinking, well, that'll teach you. Don't ever give a guy $100 bill that's doing a magic show. You genuinely want everybody in the audience, particularly the guy that volunteered that money, to be happy and to, say, next time I'm going to be the guy that does that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great choice. And it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. Earlier on, you mentioned about the comic book, how it's them reading in between the lines. So I think that's just an exact version of what you were saying, them creating the story, creating the illusion in their own heads.
Right. They really have a chance to imagine. Now, how could this possibly be so, and to give them that room, to be a co-creator of the experience is the ideal situation, I think, in a live performance. That's what distinguishes, people just watching television. This is something they experience. And, back in the 80s, there was a book called Megatrends, the 10 trends influencing the future. And one of those megatrends was, the high-tech, high-touch concept. And the more technology plays a role in our lives, the more value we'll have to personal, hands-on experiences. And that's the hope that I have with the AI now, is that AI is going to affect every facet of life, but maybe the idea of live magical experience will be one of those rare things that will actually retain its value, if not increase, in such a high tech future. That thing that happens to them live, and so my son's just going to college for the first year, and boy, to imagine what's going to be a good job 4 years from now. How can it's a total guess. The number one job now for people that graduate, and it didn't even exist 4 years ago. So the idea of how do you prepare for the kind of future at this point? But it's nice to feel like, the live magical experience, the creation of astonishment, is one of those rare experiences that people have. I mean, and awe, astonishment, those are intellectual delicacies that people don't experience very often, but when they do, they cherish it, and we are one of the last sources for that. And it's our job, to create that in people's minds. And, although I don't know, although there actually has been some recent articles about how people experiencing magic, experience these extra endorphins and there's this certain glow from the experience. There's actual now studies that have kind of supported that idea. And I've always thought maybe that experience is connected to really important things in their imagination and their creative futures and things like that. Paul Harris had a great way of looking at it, as you can imagine. He said, all children are astonished. Children, everything astonishes them, and slowly they figure things out. They have a little box in their head that explains, okay, that's not a tiny person in the screen, that's a television, and there's not a little band in that thing, that's a radio. And slowly they figure everything out, and eventually they have a box in their head that prevents them from having magical, astonishing experiences. And it's only when they run into magicians that they realize, I don't have a box in my head for that. And that's why adults frequently say, boy, my kids would love this. That's because that's the last time that they experienced that kind of thing, is when they were kids. And I just point out, it's like, no, actually, you're the one that needs it. You're the one that, that needs to be reminded what it feels like to not know how everything's done, And it's, but it's easy to think, well, that's a child's experience. In a way, it is. But that's why it's so valuable for you as an adult to have that experience.
So if there are any parents listening to this whose child says that they want to be a magician and you are panicking about it, don't worry about it, all right? Because it's going to be the go-to job in the future, I think.
Very possibly. Well, another perspective on that is children that have some reason to communicate to other people and to present things to other people, which you have to do to perform magic. It doesn't happen just for yourself. The children that do that when they're young, when they grow up, they're not afraid to stand in front of a group. They're not afraid to say hello and communicate things in front of a group. You know, I feel like there's windows of opportunity for children to learn certain things. Before they're the age of 6, you know, language comes naturally, but after that window of opportunity closes, if they haven't learned those languages by the time they're teenagers, it's very difficult, you know, to pry that window open and to learn that new language. And it's possible that the same thing exists for communicating ideas to other people and to speak and present things to their friends and to their family. You know, it's so they're so attached to screens these days that it's uncommon for them to need to communicate one-on-one or one before a group. And so those children that are able to do that while they think they're just having fun when they're young, I think is entering into that window of opportunity before it closes. If they haven't done it by the time they're teenagers, it's possible that that becomes a very difficult concept for them as they grow into adults.
Hello guys, I'm here to talk to you about Alakazam Unlimited. This is the best streaming platform in the world, I'm telling you now. With Alakazam Unlimited, you get access to over 150 magic routines. This is video performances and explanations. We have card magic, coin magic, kids magic, rope magic, mentalism, stage, parlor, impromptu. We've got you covered. All of this for the low price of just £4.99 a month. And you can cancel at any time. Perfect if you've got commitment issues. Yes, I'm talking to you. Guys, you are going to absolutely love it. If you haven't joined the platform already, what the heck are you doing? Alakazam Unlimited is a streaming platform that you need to be a part of. Not only that, there is also exclusive content only available on the platform. Check it out now, alakazam.co.uk. Cheers.
But that does lead us to the tail end of your 8. So we're on number 7. What did you put in your 7th spot?
I've always liked the Cannibal cards as a card effect. And my reason for thinking that that really sustains itself is that was one of the tricks that I would do when cousins and relatives would get together for Christmas. That maybe that's the only time we get together during the year. And that was the one effect that those kids would always ask to see, you know, do the things with the cannibals, you know. And I've gone on to see a couple of those nieces and nephews get married. And they've asked if I would perform that at their wedding. That simple trick. Yeah, with the Cannibal Kings, and so it's one that, you know, family and friends have kind of confirmed that it's retains its interest, you know, over the years. So I feel connected to that. There are other effects, card effects that maybe, you know, are more technically demanding and maybe demonstrate, you know, technical ability, you know, something like rollover aces where they're timing in the shuffles and you find the 4 aces and then the 4 aces have the 4 royal flushes. You know, there's, I did that for a number of years as a close to a close-up set. I don't do it anymore because it's flat on the table, and I don't often have a chance to do that for an audience where they can really see and understand what's happening. But it's a good television trick, and it's one of the tricks. Interestingly enough, that Di Vernon, the professor, did not like. He just felt there was too many endings. You find the aces and the deck is back in order, and now you find the royal flushes and all that. He just felt there was too. I remember one conversation about it, and I don't understand why you don't like it. It just seems like, I have a theatrical thing, that kind of makes it interesting with the timing, and it comes out in 26 seconds, and then 26, 27, 28, 29, and now the deck's back in order, there's the aces and all this. And his complaint was that too many dingle routines had too many endings. And he actually had a way of expressing it. He goes, well, if I could climax as many times as a dingle routine, I'd be a happy man. And I was just surprised that he had that perspective on it, but could appreciate his opinion at that point, and I'd have to agree, but it's not on the list, maybe for that reason. Although one of the other tricks that would be on the list, if not Crazy Man's handcuffs, kind of a toss-up between Crazy Man's handcuffs, the rubber band penetration, and or JC Super Closer is a card effect that can very much be of a watch me kind of a trick. But I turned it into something that the spectator performs and does all the kind of shuffling and cutting and shuffling and cutting and still arrives at this amazing ending. So probably tilt towards JC Super Closer as a final addition to the list over something like Crazy Man's handcuffs, because again, Crazy Man's handcuffs is more or less of a watch me trick, whereas JC Super Closer again has many climaxes, and yet it's not a watch me trick. I've turned it into an audience performed effect. I presented it as there's a trick that I've always wanted to see myself. And if you'll come up and give me a hand here, I'll kind of get you started. But I'm going to sit in your seat, and I'm going to watch you perform, and I'll kind of tell you what to do here and there. But basically, you're going to be doing the shuffling, you're going to be doing the cutting, and it's going to be kind of you doing it. And for that reason, I think it's probably got a spot on my list.
Okay, so are we choosing that as your 8th one then? Are we going for Super Closer as number 8?
Either, boy, I do have a real affinity for what I call the elbow card. If you've seen the effect where the spectator tears a corner off, they sign the torn card, then I sign the corner, and then I turn the corner upside down and put it back onto the card, and that upside down, and it's genuinely back together. It's not like I have some magic stickum that creates the illusion. And the card is genuinely back together, and the sequence is that sequence. They tear the card, they sign the torn card, I sign the corner, and the corner goes back on the card, and they get to keep that card as a souvenir. And that impossibly created thing that they get to keep falls into one of the categories that I really like, altering something magically and giving it to the spectator in this permanently altered state, and therefore they have a way of really knowing and remembering exactly what happens. And the same thing with the bill switch. When I turn the money inside out, I frequently give it to the spectator as a souvenir. And one time I saw a guy, in an airport. He goes, "You're a magician, aren't you?" Yeah. He goes, "You were at the medical trade show in Atlanta in 1991. Wow, you got a great memory." And he goes, "Here's why." And he takes his wallet out and he shows me that inside out dollar bill, "Because you turned my dollar bill inside out. And I've had it in my wallet for the last 9 years." And that's really what I'm looking for, and the fact. And if I can do something like that, it becomes a choice,
Yeah, it really seems like, just looking at your list, a lot of the tricks that you've really picked things that are about the audience, and it's about the spectator. And I know that at the end of your lecture as well, you made a comment about respecting the audience and not necessarily using them like a prop, but using them as people and giving them respect so that they respect magicians in the future as well. So I do think that your list really reflects that ethos.
Yeah, people ask, "What's your favorite trick?" And I have a hard time picking a favorite trick, because it's really has so much to do with the audience, with the situation that you're in, and there's times when just the context where an effect is performed that that makes it special, and so it's less about how I feel about one trick or another, but more about what kind of experience can you create and in what sort of context, and that's what really makes it special.
And even when you mentioned earlier on, when you create magic, you're constantly thinking about how they are going to view it and the things that they're going to think about it, and how you can adapt the routine or the effect to play with their perception of how they're going to think of it.
It's all about the final battleground, the mind of the spectator. And as soon as you really accept that as a reality, the more you realize it's as important to study their thought processes and how the mind works as it is to study more, techniques. If somebody tells me, "Hey, I have a new way to bring a card to the top of the deck," it's like, well, okay, there's a lot of ways to do that, and it's nice to have another way. But if you tell me, I have a way of making somebody care that you bring a card to the top of the deck, okay, now I'm interested. Now I'm interested, because that's the final battleground.
Well, it's a great list, and it'll be interesting to see how many of you listening got all of those, or at least half, I should think. Now, we've given you 8 of these, so we've given you 8 tricks to pick from, but for the last 3 items, you're only allowed 1 each, okay? So we're going to go to the controversial one. So what is one thing that you would ban from the industry? If you banished it for forever, what's the one thing that would go for good?
Yeah, anything in which the spectator basically becomes a prop in their show and leaves the stage regretting the fact that they came onto the stage. Because if they feel that way, you can bet everybody else in the audience feels that way, and tells themselves, well, they'll never go on stage with a magician. Never, never, never go on stage with a magician. And things like that just whittle away at the possibility for somebody genuinely respecting what magic can be about. And that's, I just in favor of making it a snowball that gets bigger for everybody. And professional campers always say, "Hey, always leave your campground cleaner than you found it," or gardeners say, "Always leave your soil more fertile than you found it." Anything that takes away from that and reduces the respect that people have for magic is really kind of unfair to the art and unfair to the spectators, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was you who mentioned the other day as well, the realization when you're with a spectator that this is someone's child, this is someone's sister, this is someone's friend.
Or wife or mother, and you really have a responsibility to treat them in the way you'd want somebody to treat your mother or your wife or your daughter. You know, it's not a matter of, and that realization came to me later in my career than it should have. But once it really dawned on me, that's what's happening. You know, they're all somebody's mother or somebody's wife or somebody's daughter or somebody's husband or that or somebody's son. You know, the responsibility to treat them the way you would want somebody to treat yours. You know.
And I think it's the realization that we are all colleagues. Even though we may never meet each other face to face, we are creating a precedent for the next performer and for the next person.
Yeah.
And we should be mindful and respectful of not just the art of magic, but each other and how someone else might therefore treat another performer down the line.
This was all here when we got here. It's going to be here when we leave. And if you can just make it a little bit better because you were there, then that feels just.
I absolutely agree. And that brings us to your book. So what is the book that you would take with you?
Well, when you say book, you know, I love Paul Harris's Art of Astonishment. That's a trilogy that Eric Mead helped him, you know, gather that material. But if I would have to pick just one, I'm not sure that, you know, one would be easy to pick. There's things like The Classic Magic of Larry Jennings is just a huge volume of really wonderful magic. The collected works of Derek Dingle is, you know, an amazing amount of material that you could play with for a lifetime. If you asked 30 years ago, I would have said Stars of Magic, because that was such a great book for me growing up, or Expert Card Technique was such a great book growing up. The collected Magical Arts Journals, you know, was a 3-year publication that dealt with the work and business and magic as show business, which is important because it is both words. If you're really going to do it, you have to devote as much time to the business as you do to the show. If you don't have a good show, you're not going to have good business. If you don't have good business, it doesn't matter how good your show is. And the Magical Arts Journal was a monthly publication that always had something interesting in it. And so when you put 3 years of those together, you really have a lot of great value. Things like the Aspen Bar Magic issue was such a great collection of commercial, valuable ideas. Paul Harris put his complete act in as an issue in the Magical Arts Journal at a time when he thought he was getting out of magic and going into scripting, writing movie scripts for a while. He wrote Nice Girls Don't Explode, which was published by Chuck Martinez, or produced by Chuck Martinez, which was very, when you watch it, it's you just kind of recognize Paul's sense of humor in it. But there was a time when he thought, okay, I'm officially out of magic and I'm doing this other thing. And so I don't mind if we record my act exactly as it was scripted and performed by him when he was performing. So, I mean, there's still a lot of great value in that collected works of the Magic Arts Journal. You know, Hugard's Magic Monthly was compiled, but that was like 8 or 9 volumes. Apocalypse was combined, but that's several volumes. You know, but things like that really have a lot of good, valuable information in them, you know.
Well, I will sort of break the fourth wall here and say that earlier on we did actually tell Michael about this. So at no point was Devil's Advocate going to come out, because there are some people I could not do that to. So I'll let you take all of those books as your one book. You're allowed all of them.
They would all be fair choices. So if I only got, or you know, Martin Gardner's collected. Those were impromptu effects that appeared in publications for years. It just has a mountain of good magic in it, a surprising amount of great magic in there, because it was collected over maybe 30 or 40 years. So anybody that made that choice would be content with that as a choice. It's not easy, but any one of those would be adequate content for a desert island.
Well, you're the first guest that we've given a small library to for their island.
It's more of a bookshelf than a book.
Well, that takes us on to your last thing. So what's the item, so a non-magic item that you use for magic that you could not live without?
Well, it would be nice to have my wife there. It would be nice to have a good coffee machine or a desalination device if I'm on a desert island, or an iPhone with a solar charger. Again, it's any one of those would be good choices if I really had to. And I'm not sure what I would grab if the house was on fire and I could only carry one thing. Probably my wife, but
that was a good save, because she's probably going to listen to this back.
She's probably in the other room now. So,
well, that's a great list, and thank you so much. There's so much wonderful advice there. Now, if people want to find out more about you, obviously you're over here at the moment doing your UK lecture tour. Mm-hmm. If people want to either find out more about this lecture tour or about ones in America, if they want to find out more about you, where you're going to be, where can they go?
Well, I have a website, ammarmagic.com. That's AMMARMAGIC.com. I also have a download site, worldsgreatestmagic.com. You have to put www.worldsgreatestmagic.com, and then it has a ton of those easy to master videos on there. A lot of them are broken down into individual tricks so that you get to watch that effect, and if you like it, you get to download just the secret for that one effect. So that's a good source for reaching out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again. I know we've literally just thrown Michael in the studio and said we're going to do this podcast. So thank you again for doing it.
It's a pleasure, Jamie, and I'm happy to do it because, Peter Nardi and Wayne Goodman really made this lecture tour possible. The first person I asked was Tony Antonio, who would be a good person to help arrange a tour in the UK. And his comment was, well, Peter Nardi at Alakazam really knows everybody. He's got a good relationship with people across the board, and that was good advice. And these guys really did an amazing job. It's a rather dense tour. Overall it's maybe 35 events in maybe 33 different cities and 38 days, so there's not much downtime, and we I had to actually buy some extra socks and underwear because there was no chance to wash them along the way. But that's the nature of the beast, and happy to stay busy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the time of recording, now we've actually got your academy tonight as well. So it would be remiss of me not to mention that. I was at your lecture the other night, which was phenomenal. But I'm really excited tonight because whilst there'll be a little bit of crossover, there's going to be unique material here that you've not put in your lecture as well. Some classics and some of the things that you've actually spoken about in this podcast.
Right, will be in this filming tonight. So it's essentially a different lecture. There's one or two things that are kind of universal that people might like to see and might value as a recording that they can review in real time. So it'll be an interesting. I'm actually kind of wish I could watch some of my own videos to kind of prepare for this. But it'll be fun.
Yeah, amazing. And thank you all for listening. Now, please do go check out Michael Ammar's website. Do go check out his tour. If you're in the UK at the time that this episode goes out, he is still touring. So there are still some dates. So do go find him. Do go check them out. Of course, do check out his book, which was recently reprinted, and there are lots of signed ones in the UK right now. So you can get yours signed as well, of course, if you go to one of his lectures. And do go check out the Academy. If you've not seen it by the time that this goes out, then of course it's still available after. And I know already it's going to be full of incredible material. So please do go check that out. So for now, we hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you again next week for another episode of Desert Island Tricks. Goodbye.
When I perform at gigs, I look at effects that tick these 3 boxes. Is it super strong and powerful? Yes. Will it last with your spectators for a lifetime? Absolutely. And does it leave them with a souvenir that perfectly captures the moment of magic? If that all sounds exactly what you're after, look no further than the liquid forks. These forks have been custom designed to be able to bend right in front of your spectators' eyes. It's so easy to perform, it's so visual, and trust me, they will honestly keep this impossible object because they've seen it morph in front of their eyes. It literally does the impossible. Not only that, Liquid Forks comes with 50 of these forks in each pack, and it comes with the full Liquid Forks routine taught by the world famous David Penn. Not only that, we have a subscription service. If you guys love these forks and you get through them at your gigs, we now offer a monthly subscription where you get sent a box through every single month at a 10% reduced fee. Like I said, you guys are going to be loving these. You're going to be performing them every chance you can. Trust me, the reactions are second to none. So guys, head over to alakazam.co.uk, pick up a set of Liquid Forks. You will not regret it. Easy to do. Leaves them with a killer souvenir. And to be honest with you, it's not cards, it's not coins, it's not mentalism. It's something beyond belief. Check it out now, guys, the Liquid Forks.